As it's Super Bowl week, I'm bringing you 5 must-buy players for Dynasty Fantasy Football. If you like Dynasty Fantasy Football content, hit that like and subscribe button as we are on the way to 5,000 subscribers. When we started off with player number 1 that you need to be buying in Dynasty Fantasy Football right now, it is going to be Brian Thomas Jr. for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I know everybody and their mother is telling you to buy Brian Thomas Jr. right now. And Brian Thomas Jr., when we're looking at him as an asset over on Keep Trade Cut, has absolutely gone flying up the boards. Right now, sliding in as wide receiver 5 on Keep Trade Cut. He is right behind Malik Neighbors, CeeDee Lamb, and he's ahead of guys like Amon-Ra and Puka Nacua. And you're going to say to me, Caleb, that's absolutely crazy. And I'm with you. I think a lot of us in the Dynasty space love to get these young wide receivers going. And when we're looking at the overall value, I mean, a few weeks ago, he was sliding in as the wide receiver 7. So he's jumped up 2 total spots, which on the top 10 rankings is a big jump for Brian Thomas Jr. Currently going behind, like we said, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Hurts, ahead of guys like Amon-Ra, Puka, Trey McBride in the overall valued players. But I'm here to tell you that I would be buying Brian Thomas Jr. in Dynasty Fantasy Football because right now, Brian Thomas Jr. finished the season as the wide receiver 11 on a points per game basis, 133 targets, 87 receptions. And a lot of people are going to say, oh, Caleb, the only reason Brian Thomas Jr. finished so good in the season was because Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram got hurt. You had no Trevor Lawrence. So Mac Jones, the only person he could throw to was Brian Thomas Jr. And while there is a little bit of truth to that, I really think Brian Thomas Jr. was going to emerge in that second half of the season, whether we liked it or not. And boy, did he emerge. And I think there's a lot of conversation to be had that Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. are this new age Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson out of LSU. Absolute crazy wide receiver factory. Listen, I got the Ohio State jerseys behind me. It's been quoted as wide receiver U. I don't know how you can continue to hold that type of gavel when we've seen the absolute amazing production from these elite level LSU wide receivers. But you got to be going and buying Brian Thomas Jr. because we're going into year 2. We see a head coaching hire in Liam Cohen, which we're assuming is going to mean really good things for both Trevor Lawrence, but also Brian Thomas Jr., who if Brian Thomas Jr. can be utilized a little bit more in the slot instead of being the full X all the time, I think we're going to be talking about Brian Thomas Jr. continuing to climb and just be that steady state asset in the top 5 of Dynasty wide receiver rankings going forward. Like we said, finished as the wide receiver 15 in targets with 133, wide receiver 16 in receptions, receiving yards 1,282, wide receiver 6, yards after the catch, wide receiver 5, so absolutely explosive once he got the ball in his hands. I want me some Brian Thomas Jr. And I think when I think about trades that you could potentially be doing, like in a league where I am rebuilding, I had the 101 and I was able to flip the 101 to go get a guy like a Brian Thomas Jr., which I made that trade. It was about 2.5 weeks ago. So of course, as Brian Thomas Jr., these last few weeks has definitely been going up in overall value. Might be a little bit more expensive than that, but I think if you can go trade the 101, even the 102, if you have one of those picks to go get Brian Thomas Jr., go do that because he's an absolutely elite level wide receiver option. Now, I wanted to pull up some Dynasty Daddy trades too to kind of, instead of just giving my opinion, also throw in some real life trades that are happening for Brian Thomas Jr. Someone traded Bucky Irving in the 112 for Brian Thomas Jr. Give me Brian Thomas. Someone traded the 104 and Terry McLaurin for Brian Thomas. Go give me Brian Thomas. Someone, juicy enough, traded Brian Thomas Jr. for Malik Neighbors. Now, we talked about how you might like Malik Neighbors because you're like, hey, he did all that without having a good quarterback this year. While we're assuming Brian Thomas Jr., he did have Trevor Lawrence for a part of the season, did have Mac Jones. I mean, I think a lot of people are saying, hey, if Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. can get on the same page, we could be talking about Brian Thomas Jr. scoring more fantasy football points than Malik Neighbors, especially when we see kind of what was left on the bone in regards to the overall targets to receptions. Like we said, he had 133 overall targets, only 87 receptions. I still have Malik Neighbors ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. I'm not that juicy of a trade, but like I said, I think if you're trying to buy Brian Thomas Jr., I think there's people that don't have him as this absolute next coming of Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson type asset, and that's what I'm trying to buy him to be, my overall wide receiver 1. I want him in my wide receiver 1 spot, my wide receiver 2 spot on my Dynasty team because I think going forward, that's only going to mean good things for your Dynasty Fantasy Football team. The next guy we're going to be talking about buying in Dynasty Fantasy Football, it's going to be CeeDee Lamb for the Dallas Cowboys. And yes, these first 3 guys we're talking about, actually first 4 guys, they're not cheap. When I'm at this point in the offseason, I want to be addressing and going and getting studs that I know I can plug into my lineup and that are not going to lose value. And CeeDee Lamb is 100% that guy right now. To me, who is still 25 years old, wide receiver 4 in Dynasty, so he's behind Chase, Neighbors, Jefferson. But CeeDee Lamb, let's not forget, last year had maybe the greatest fantasy football season of all time for a wide receiver. This year, we see Dak Prescott get hurt midway through the year. We see what it looks like with Cooper Rush, and CeeDee Lamb even tried to battle through an injury. But in 15 total games, CeeDee Lamb still put up really good numbers this year. 17.6 fantasy points per game, was the wide receiver 8 on the year. Of course, goes from 181 targets because he played in 17 games to 152, so it wasn't the exact great stats. Also only had 6 touchdowns compared to the 12 that he had the year before. So I think going forward, there's a lot of things that can be improved. Now, the Dallas head coaching situation, no more Mike McCarthy. A lot of people aren't excited about the new regime for the Dallas Cowboys, but I got to say, Dak Prescott coming back might be one of the good buys, cheaper buys to be had in Dynasty Fantasy Football. But I still have Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb and him have a great connection. So I think CeeDee Lamb, unless they're probably going to address the wide receiver position in the draft, I still want to be taking my shots at CeeDee Lamb and going up and trading for an absolute stud in Dynasty Fantasy Football. I was actually in a rebuild, and the same league that I made the trade where I traded the 101 away for Brian Thomas Jr., I was able to get CeeDee Lamb for the 103, the 107, and a future second. And that to me was enough to go get a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who is still only 25. We're still entering the prime of his career over these next 3 seasons. Give me some CeeDee Lamb, especially at wide receiver 4 prices on Keep Trade Cut. Think he absolutely helps you continue to have an absolutely great Dynasty fantasy football team. Now, moving on to my third buy that we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. for the Arizona Cardinals. And yes, this might be the part of the show where you're like, Caleb, there's a bias coming in, the Ohio State Buckeye player. Marvin Harrison Jr. was a disappointment in year 1. And I think saying that he was a disappointment in year 1, I think is 100% something that you should be able to say. Because to be fair, we were projecting him to be the next coming to Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson as a rookie, and he did not live up to those expectations, only putting up 11.6 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 37 in points per game, 116 targets, 62 receptions, 8 total receiving touchdowns. Now, the part for me when we're looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. and, of course, him not being able to put up the same sort of production that we saw in guys like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. is just being excited for the future. But I wanted to see a little bit more creativity out of this Arizona Cardinals offense. I mean, if you tuned in, Trey McBride didn't really get to catch a touchdown until later in the season. We've seen Marvin Harrison Jr. being used primarily as the X, using him in go routes down the field, clearing up stuff down across the middle for Trey McBride. But you drafted it, Marvin Harrison Jr. with your 4th overall pick. You think you're trying to get him involved in the offense. And of course, we saw 8 receiving touchdowns. That's not bad. Like the stats, 885 yards, 8 total touchdowns as a rookie. If this was a few years ago, we're probably like, it was an okay campaign. He'll bounce back in year 2. But since we're seeing the birth of, you got to be a superstar rookie level wide receiver in year 1 or else it's not going to happen for you, I think a lot of people get a little bit worried about where Marvin Harrison Jr. is going forward. And of course, yes, he had similar stats to his dad when he came into the NFL, but that was almost like a 28 age gap. And the NFL has changed so much where you're throwing the ball out more. I don't think that argument's necessarily there, but as somebody that loves some Marvin Harrison Jr., the prospect is still the same. I think the same guy that we saw on film at Ohio State, the same guy that the analytical community absolutely loved, I think is still in there. And I think being able to buy him low with where he's currently going at right now on Keep Trade Cut, sliding as a wide receiver 11. So if you're looking at his overall value, going is still ahead of guys like JSN, Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, going behind guys like Nico Collins, Drake London, Ladd McConkey. I think that's probably a fair range. I mean, I think I'm still taking Marvin Harrison Jr. over JSN, Garrett Wilson, and AJ Brown. I, in a league, traded for Marvin Harrison Jr. I gave up the 105 and the 108 in this year's class. Like I said, this is super flex, so I did give up 2 first. And some of you might say, Caleb, that's absolutely ridiculous. But I think if you're being real with yourself, if Marvin Harrison Jr. was in this draft class, we would be taking Marvin Harrison Jr. over Ashton Genty, 100%. So I don't know why people are all of a sudden like, I understand a little bit of a worry. We saw Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors all outshine Marvin Harrison Jr. So what, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the wide receiver 4 in this class, it's looking like at this point in time. But who's not to say that Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. don't lock it in going into year 2, especially considering the fact that we were saying 116 targets and only 62 receptions. That's a lot of incompletions. That's a lot of just not getting the ball thrown to. And when you're looking at the overall air yards, Marvin Harrison Jr. had a great opportunity. He was getting thrown the ball a ton down the field, a ton of deep targets. The issue just continues to be that the overall target accuracy wasn't great, when it was going to Marvin Harrison Jr. So hopefully him and Kyler Murray could get locked in heading into year 2, because Marvin Harrison Jr. right now is an absolutely great value in drafts. And I think you need to definitely be buying into Marvin Harrison Jr. if you need wide receiver help, because he's a little bit cheaper than Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors right now, clearly. But I still think he does have that overall upside to get back into being a top 7, top 6 dynasty asset in the wide receiver ranks just based on his name alone. I mean, Kyler, the fact that he had a little bit of a down year tells you all you need to know. A lot of this is name brand, name value, and everyone still in the dynasty community does like the name Marvin Harrison Jr. So I definitely think you need to be trying to trade for some Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, going to my next guy that you need to be buying in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and we're still standing a little bit more expensive. It's the QB 13 over on Keep Trade Cut. It's going to be Kyler Murray for the Arizona Cardinals. So Marvin Harrison Jr. is running mate. And I understand it was not a good year for Kyler Murray. QB 12 in fantasy football, QB 12 on a points per game basis. But Kyler Murray, let's not forget, is still super young, 27.5 years old. So he's going to be 28 next season. We have him another year healthier, recovering from that ACL. And I know he was healthy this last season, playing in all 17 games, ran for 572 rushing yards, 5 total touchdowns. The thing that really held him back this year was just the lack of passing touchdowns compared to in previous years. I think if he could have gotten 5 or 6 more touchdowns, we're talking about Kyler Murray probably back being somewhere in that QB 6 to QB 8 points per game range, which then boosts his overall dynasty fantasy football value. But a lot of people are kind of souring on Kyler Murray because of the way that he wasn't able to get their Trey McBrides early on in the season and their Marvin Harrison Jr. shares really going. And so I think this is the perfect opportunity to go try to buy low into Kyler Murray, who in startups I have seen going in that back end of the third. I've even seen him fall into the early 4th as that QB 13. I mean, when you're looking at the QBs, like he's going behind in the tier, like Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Jordan Love, and then Kyler Murray. Like that's kind of the range for Kyler Murray. Going behind Bucky Irving, Sam Laporta, an early 1st in 2026. Baker Mayfield's right behind Kyler Murray. Like I think if we come back to this discussion at the end of next season, we could easily talk ourselves into Kyler Murray easily passing up Jordan Love and Bo Nix. And then you got a guy like a Caleb Williams. We'll have to see what happens with Caleb Williams' overall value. But I think it's just such a great value to be going and trying to buy Kyler Murray right now. And I have Kyler on a lot of teams. And when you start to kind of talk there's just a lot of people that don't like him. And so when you try to start to float offers, a lot of people, the name in of itself does not get them excited. But like, here's a trade from a day ago. Trey Benson and Trevor Lawrence for Kyler Murray, Tony Pollard. I mean, come on. Give me the Kyler Murray, Tony Pollard side 100% there. Someone traded a first for DJ Moore and Kyler Murray. Oh, 100%. Give me the Kyler Murray side. I mean, someone just got absolutely swindled there. But I just continue to think that Kyler Murray needs to be a guy that you're taking a chance on in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. I think it's just really important as we're talking through overall strategy. Now, wanted to bring you one more player to talk about for Dynasty Fantasy Football that was a little bit of a disappointment in 2024. And that player is going to be Rome Odunze for the Chicago Bears. And Rome, where out though, Rome, disappointing. Playing alongside Keenan Allen, playing alongside DJ Moore. It wasn't great. It wasn't great for Rome. Putting up wide receiver 53, 8.5 fantasy points per game. The part that I do want to hit on is he did have 101 targets, playing in an offense, competing with the likes of Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. But right now, when we look at him on Keep Trade Cut, Rome Odunze sliding in as wide receiver 17. And the reason that I think this is a good value to be having for Rome Odunze is the guys behind him, Devontae Smith, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, I do not believe have the same amount of upside as a guy like a Rome Odunze. And then the guys ahead of him, AJ Brown, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, I think you AJ Brown, T. Higgins for sure. Those are a little bit more competitive assets. And so I just think the value that you're currently getting with Rome Odunze, that he is the long-term answer for the Bears as their wide receiver. You got Ben Johnson sliding in. Could Rome Odunze be the new Amon-Ra? Could he be his number one target that he gets open? I mean, they're going to still, DJ Moore still going to be the one next year, in my personal opinion, on the Chicago Bears. But I think Rome Odunze could easily slide in as that number 2 option. And especially if Caleb Williams can be a little bit more efficient. I think we saw the high-end upside of like Rome Odunze when he went up against the Colts. We're talking about a guy who put up 23 points in that game, had 6 total receptions, 1 total touchdown, 112 yards. Like we started to see some of when those air yards really started to come to his way, him be able to put up some decent fantasy football days. And so I guess I can't bite the Rome. I still had Rome as my wide receiver 3 last offseason, Of course, I'm buying into Brian Thomas Jr. I love Malik Neighbors. I mean, I just think this 2024 class was just absolutely so stacked. We all know that. I just think you got to be trying to buy into Odunze at this point in the offseason, not knowing what the Bears are going to do. I think the Bears will probably address their offensive line even more, address their defense, which all those things are really just going to benefit Odunze as a whole. And I just want more shares of Odunze because right now he's currently valued around like that 105 to 106 value in your rookie drafts. I think that's the kind of a fair value that I would be trying to send out to go get him on some of my overall rosters. So if you like Dynasty Fantasy Football, if you like winning, if you like trades, hit that like and subscribe button as we are answering all your questions down below. It's going to be a great offseason. We got more rookie content on the way. We got some stashes. We got some sells. We're going to be talking just everything Dynasty Fantasy Football. It's a good time of year. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.